Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine this. You wake up before sunrise, not to birds or calm air, but to the sound of boots hitting the ground. Heavy boots, thousands of them. The earth shakes as soldiers move through the streets. You don't know why they are here. You don't know who they are looking for. But you know one thing very clearly. Someone will not survive today. This is not a battlefield. This is your home. In the Assyrian Empire, fear was not a feeling that came and went. Fear was the air people breathed. It lived in the walls of cities, in the dirt of villages, in the silence of families sitting together at night, hoping the knock would not come to their door. There were no safe people, no safe places, no safe days. You did not need to be a criminal. You did not need to be a rebel. Sometimes, simply being alive in the wrong place was enough. The Assyrian Empire ruled through terror, and everyone, soldier, farmer, child, or elder, knew what that meant. Bodies were displayed as warnings. Cities were erased to teach lessons. Survival was never about courage or strength. It was about luck, pure cold luck. The Assyrians did not hide their cruelty. They used it like a weapon. Every conquest was meant to be seen, heard, and remembered. Fear traveled faster than armies. Often, cities surrendered before a single arrow was fired, because people already knew what happened to those who resisted. And yet, this empire did not rise by chaos alone. Behind the horror was a machine, organized, disciplined, and terrifyingly efficient. Every man was a soldier. Every village was part of the war effort. Every resource existed to feed the army, arm the army, and move the army forward. There was no escape from it. If you lived under Assyrian rule, your labor could be demanded at any moment. If you resisted, your punishment would become a story others were forced to hear. And if you were taken as a soldier, the violence followed you forever, even if you survived. This is why a single day in the Assyrian Empire could be your last. And now we go inside that world. Make sure to watch the video all the way till the end. I promise you're going to find it super informative. We put a lot of hard work into bringing you this content, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and share it with your friends. Your support helps the channel grow and motivates us to keep creating even better videos for you. Before I continue, remember, this world was not cruel by accident. It was designed this way. Now let us begin. Life in the Assyrian Empire did not start with hope. It started with fear. From the moment a child could understand words, they understood one truth very clearly: power ruled everything. The Assyrian kings did not promise safety or peace. They promised dominance, and they kept that promise through terror. The empire stretched across vast lands, from rivers and deserts to mountains and distant cities. But no matter where you lived, the experience was the same. Fear connected every corner of the empire like invisible chains. Stories traveled faster than soldiers. People whispered about what happened to cities that resisted. Entire populations vanished. Walls were torn down. Leaders were skinned alive or publicly executed. These were not secret punishments. They were messages. The Assyrians wanted everyone to know. Their armies marched with purpose. They did not simply defeat enemies. They erased them. When a city refused to obey, it did not face a quick battle. It faced destruction meant to be remembered for generations. Survivors were forced to watch the deaths of their leaders. Children grew up knowing exactly what rebellion looked like and what it cost. This fear was not only for enemies. Even Assyrian citizens lived under constant pressure. The state demanded obedience, labor, and service. The king was not just a ruler. He was seen as chosen by the gods. To disobey the king was to disobey the divine order itself. This belief made resistance feel impossible. It was not just dangerous, it was sacred betrayal. Every village existed to support the empire's war machine. Crops were grown not just to feed families, but to feed soldiers. Roads were built not for travelers, but for armies. Blacksmiths worked day and night, shaping weapons that would soon end lives. Even those far from the front lines felt the weight of war pressing down on them. Fear entered homes at night. Parents taught their children to stay quiet, to avoid attention, to obey instantly. A loud voice or careless word could bring danger. Soldiers could arrive without warning, demanding food, labor, or men for service. There were no negotiations. Refusal was not an option. Luck became the most valuable thing a person could have. Not skill, not strength, not loyalty, just luck. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could end everything. A village could be punished because of one act of resistance, one rumor, one failed delivery. This was a society where survival did not mean living well. It meant living carefully. Even celebrations were controlled. Joy was allowed only when it served power. Parades honored victories. Monuments showed conquered enemies in chains. Art was filled with violence, carved into stone so it could never be forgotten. The message was simple and clear. This empire was eternal, and it crushed those who stood in its way. By designing fear into everyday life, the Assyrians ruled millions with fewer soldiers than expected. People obeyed not because they loved the empire, but because they were terrified of it. And fear, once learned, is hard to forget. Before I go on, understand this clearly. The Assyrians did not use terror by accident. They studied it. They perfected it. They turned fear into one of the deadliest weapons in history. The Assyrian army was not just strong. Many empires had strong armies. What made the Assyrians different was how they made people surrender before the battle even began. They believed that breaking the mind was more powerful than breaking the body. When Assyrian soldiers approached a city, the people already knew the stories. They had heard what happened to others who resisted. They had seen refugees with empty eyes. They had walked past ruins where cities once stood. Sometimes the army didn't need to fight at all. The gates opened on their own. But when a city resisted, the punishment was unforgettable. The Assyrians made examples of their enemies. Leaders of rebel cities were publicly killed in brutal ways. Bodies were displayed outside city walls. Survivors were forced to watch. This was not done in private. It was done loudly, clearly, and slowly. The message spread faster than any written word. Fear became a warning system. The empire wanted people to talk. They wanted stories to spread. They wanted mothers to tell children, "Obey, or this will happen to us." They wanted neighboring cities to surrender without using a single arrow. Once a city fell, the suffering did not end. Entire populations were uprooted. Families were torn apart and sent to different regions of the empire. This made rebellion harder. People could not rise together if they were scattered far from their homes. You might survive, but you would never belong again. For the Assyrians, terror was efficient. Their soldiers were trained to move fast, strike hard, and show no mercy. Mercy was seen as weakness. The goal was not peace. The goal was obedience through fear. When resistance disappeared, the empire could move forward without delay. But terror affected everyone, including the soldiers themselves. Young men grew up knowing they would one day march into other lands and do terrible things, or face terrible things in return. Violence became normal. Killing was not questioned. It was duty. And once violence becomes normal, it changes the soul of a society. Villages near the borders lived in constant panic. Any sign of unrest could bring punishment. Any failure to meet demands could be seen as rebellion. People learned to silence themselves. Silence meant safety. The Assyrians recorded their victories proudly. Stone carvings showed enemies begging, bleeding, and dying. These images were placed in public spaces where everyone could see them. This was not art for beauty. It was art for control. Fear held the empire together. But fear alone is never stable. It must be fed. And the empire fed it with constant war, constant movement, and constant demands. The terror weapon worked, but it came at a price. A world built on fear must keep frightening its people. The moment fear fades, control begins to crack. The Assyrian Empire did not survive on fear alone. Fear opened the door. War kept it open. Behind every act of terror was a system organized, disciplined, and cold. The Assyrians built one of the most advanced war machines the ancient world had ever seen. This machine did not sleep. It did not pause. And it did not forgive weakness. The Assyrian army was always ready. Unlike other societies where soldiers were called only during war, Assyria lived in permanent preparation. Weapons were stored, roads were maintained, and messages moved quickly across the empire. War was not an event. It was a way of life. Every detail mattered. Soldiers were trained to fight together, not as individuals. They moved as units, followed strict commands, and used planned tactics. This made them faster and deadlier than most armies they faced. Cities that relied on old defenses or disorganized fighters did not stand a chance. The Assyrians mastered siege warfare. Walls that once meant safety became traps. Siege towers rolled forward. Walls were broken. Water supplies were cut. Starvation did the work when weapons could not. Inside the city, fear grew as food vanished and hope died. Even if you were not a soldier, the war reached you. Civilians supported the army at all times. Farmers provided food. Craftsmen made armor and weapons. Workers repaired roads for marching troops. There was no separation between military life and civilian life. Everyone was part of the war effort, whether they wanted to be or not. This constant pressure exhausted people. If a harvest failed, punishment followed. If supplies arrived late, suspicion grew. Failure was rarely forgiven. The empire demanded results, not excuses. People learned to live in a state of constant anxiety, always watching the calendar, the roads, and the skies. The Assyrians also understood psychology. They attacked not just cities but hope itself. They struck during important seasons. They destroyed symbols of identity. Temples, walls, and monuments were targeted to erase pride and confidence. Once a people believed they were already defeated, resistance collapsed. And still, the empire grew. Speed was another weapon. Assyrian armies moved quickly, striking one region and then another before news could spread. Rebellions were crushed before they fully formed. By the time help arrived, it was too late. This efficiency influenced future empires. The idea of standing armies, organized supply lines, and total war would be copied centuries later. But in Assyria, these ideas were born in blood. For the common person, life under this machine meant uncertainty. You could be ordered to march, to build, or to die. You had no choice. The machine demanded obedience and sacrifice. War shaped everything. Children grew up watching soldiers pass through their villages. They heard screams from distant cities. They learned that strength came from destruction. Peace was temporary. Violence was normal. The war machine did not care who you were. It only cared that it kept moving forward. And if it needed your life to do so, it took it. In the Assyrian Empire, there was no clear line between civilian and warrior. That line was erased the moment a boy was born. From a young age, Assyrian males were raised with one future in mind: military service. It was not a choice. It was an obligation. To be Assyrian meant to serve the army sooner or later. This single rule shaped the entire society and left no family untouched. Boys grew up watching their fathers leave with the soldiers. Some returned broken. Some returned hardened. Many never returned at all. Death was accepted early in life, not as a tragedy, but as a duty fulfilled. Mothers learned not to cry loudly. Public grief was weakness. Private grief was all that was allowed. Training began early. Young men learned to carry weapons, march in formation, and obey orders without question. Discipline mattered more than courage. The worst crime was hesitation. A soldier who questioned orders endangered everyone and was punished severely. Service in the army was brutal. Campaigns lasted for months or years. Soldiers marched across deserts, climbed mountains, and fought in unfamiliar lands. Food was scarce. Disease was common. The enemy was everywhere. And behind them, the empire watched closely. Failure did not end at the battlefield. If a soldier fled or disobeyed, punishment followed his family. This rule ensured obedience. Fear was extended beyond the individual. A man fought not just for survival, but to protect his loved ones from suffering. The empire understood this very well. But military life did not only destroy those who fought. It damaged those who waited. Women, children, and elders lived in constant uncertainty. They did not know when their men would return or if they would return at all. Fields were left untended. Families struggled to survive. Labor demands did not stop just because war took men away. Communities became silent places. Conversations were careful. People avoided speaking about loss or doubt. Everyone understood that words could bring danger. Even hope had to be hidden. Violence changed the people who survived it. Men who returned from war often came back different. They had seen too much. Fear became anger. Kindness became rare. The empire created soldiers, but it also created scars that never healed. Children saw this and learned quickly. They learned that strength meant hardness. Compassion was risky. Survival required obedience and silence. The entire society rotated around war. Holidays, laws, and honor were connected to military success. Even faith was shaped by conquest. Victory was seen as proof of divine support. Defeat was blamed on weakness or disobedience. In this world, peace was dangerous. When there was no war, people expected one. Silence felt like a pause before a storm. And when the call came again, men stood up, took their weapons, and left, because refusal was unthinkable. To live in the Assyrian Empire was to be part of the army, whether you held a sword or not. War followed everyone. Under Assyrian rule, obedience was not requested. It was demanded, and it was enforced with cruelty that left no room for doubt. The empire needed constant resources to survive. Armies required food, weapons, animals, and labor. To get these, the Assyrians placed heavy demands on everyone they controlled. Taxes were not just measured in silver or grain. They were measured in bodies, time, and suffering. Villages were ordered to provide workers for construction projects. Roads, walls, and military buildings rose across the empire, built by hands that had no choice. Men, women, and even children could be taken for forced labor. Some never returned home. This labor was not temporary. People were moved far from their lands, separated from family and community. The goal was control. Displacement destroyed identity. A person without roots was easier to command. The empire understood that breaking connection was as powerful as breaking resistance. Any sign of rebellion, no matter how small, brought extreme punishment. A missed delivery, a late tax, a rumor of resistance. These could all bring soldiers to your door. Once accused, there was rarely a chance to explain. Justice was fast, public, and brutal. Punishment was meant to teach others not to be fair. Fear replaced trust. Neighbors watched each other carefully. One careless word could lead to suspicion. Informers were rewarded. Silence became safety. The empire turned people against themselves without lifting a sword. The cost of resistance was clear. Entire communities were destroyed for rising up. Leaders were made examples of. Survivors were scattered across the empire. Their culture, language, and history were slowly erased. What remained was obedience or death. Even loyal subjects were never fully safe. Obedience today did not guarantee protection tomorrow. Demands increased as the empire expanded. More soldiers were needed. More supplies were taken. More labor was required. The pressure never eased. People lived with constant exhaustion. They woke up fearing orders. They slept fearing knock on the door. Life was survival day after day without relief. And yet many endured. They adapted. They learned when to speak and when to stay silent. They learned how to appear obedient even when fear ruled their hearts. This quiet endurance allowed the empire to survive for centuries. But deep beneath the surface, cracks were forming. A system built entirely on fear and force cannot last forever. Control requires constant violence. And violence eventually turns inward. The same system that crushed enemies also crushed its own people. Obedience held the empire together, but it also planted the seeds of its collapse. By the end, the Assyrian Empire stood tall in size but hollow inside. For centuries, fear had kept it alive. Terror controlled enemies. Violence controlled people. War controlled time itself. But fear is a fragile foundation. It demands constant feeding, and eventually it consumes everything around it. The empire had expanded too far, too fast. Each new conquest required more soldiers, more labor, more resources. The machine that once brought power now demanded endless sacrifice. People were exhausted. Lands were drained. Families were broken beyond repair. Inside the empire, trust was gone. Officials feared their superiors. Soldiers feared punishment. Civilians feared everyone. No one felt secure. Even loyalty became dangerous. A loyal subject today could be accused tomorrow. Power shifted quickly, and accusations moved faster than truth. Kings ruled through intimidation, but this isolated them. Surrounded by fear, they heard only what people thought they wanted to hear. Real problems were hidden. Failures were covered up. When crises came, the responses were slow and confused. The very terror that once protected the empire now weakened it. Revolts began to rise. Not always loudly, but steadily. Border regions resisted more often. Soldiers grew tired. Supplies ran low. The war machine slowed. Enemies noticed. Empires around Assyria learned its methods and adapted. They strengthened defenses. They formed alliances. They waited. Fear no longer worked the way it once did. The stories of terror lost their power as people realized the empire could bleed too. Inside Assyria, generations had grown up knowing only violence. This left no room for renewal, no space for flexibility. When pressure increased, there was no compassion to soften it. Only more force, only more punishment, only more fear. And fear cannot fix everything. Eventually, cities fell not to terror but to exhaustion. The system collapsed under its own weight. The people who had been forced to obey for so long were too broken to save it. This is why you would not survive a single day in the Assyrian Empire. Not because you are weak, but because survival there had nothing to do with strength or skill. It depended on silence, obedience, and luck. Even then, luck ran out. In that world, life was borrowed time. Every sunrise was uncertain. Every knock could be the last. Every command had to be obeyed. The Assyrian Empire did not just conquer lands, conquered fear. And in the end, fear conquered it back.